Should Detroit double its transit funding? That is what we're going to discuss on today's episode of Your Daily Detroit for Tuesday, January 21st, 2025. I'm Jer Stays, and let's jump into that conversation. Joining me at the table at Tech Town is Joel Batterman. He is the campaigns manager for Transportation Riders United. And we're going to have an interesting conversation, I think, around transit and transportation in Detroit. Joel, first time, welcome to Daily Detroit.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, oftentimes we have your colleague Megan Owens, so it's so good to see you. I know you're always working hard on this stuff behind the scenes. Good to see you at the microphone. It is not an unknown story that Metro Detroit has a number of transportation challenges. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the city of Detroit because there's a big plan that's been talked about, this DDOT Reimagined Plan, but also it really hasn't come to fruition, if we're being honest, right? So why don't we talk a little bit about the state of the Detroit Department of Transportation and this reimagined plan to improve things? And, you know, you can go look through the news articles, whatever. We know that there are a lot of issues with Detroit Transit right now. So why don't we get at the heart of what's happening and kind of talk about this idea to make it better?
For folks who aren't aware, the DDOT Reimagined Plan was released last year, 2024, and it basically spells out a plan for doubling the amount of bus service in the city of Detroit. Obviously, there are still some serious reliability issues with the bus service, but one of the big problems is just that even if the buses are running on schedule, they're not very frequent. There are a lot of routes like the Linwood near where I live that only run about once an hour, which isn't the level of service that you need to make transit convenient.
So what, for people who are listening and maybe aren't familiar, what is the level of service that you want to make transit more convenient?
Most definitions of frequent transit service, the level of service that you need to not even have to look at a schedule, but just show up at a bus stop and be confident that a bus will be coming by soon. 15 minutes is usually what's considered frequent transit. And we do have that on a few routes in Detroit right now. Some of the major routes like Woodward, Gratiot, Jefferson. But most of the routes in the city, are not that frequent. Only every 45 minutes, an hour. Once you get off those major corridors, you just don't have much service running there.
What are Detroit residents and the city of Detroit missing out on by not having transit that is frequent enough or reliable enough, especially off of those main corridors?
Well, there's so much, really. As I think folks know, the cost of owning a car is really steep when you think of insurance, maintenance, and so many Detroiters don't have access to a car or don't have access to a reliable car. I'm sure folks have seen some of these vehicles on the street that look like they've been through a lot. So, it's a serious issue for folks who can't drive or have limited access to a car, but also a quality of life issue. A lot of folks would really like the ability to get around without a car in the city, or maybe take their family down from 2 to 1 cars. Save some money that way. There's so many other reasons. There's sustainability, there's the value of transit and economic development. So there really is just so much that we are missing out on without a stronger transit system.
I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I have looked before and seen that, in fact, city residents, although we're the Motor City, and I don't remember the number, and I'm sorry, but there is a pretty high percentage of residents that either don't have a car, don't have access to a car. And in fact, I think it's among the top in the nation, like in the top grouping of the nation, right?
I'm not sure the ranking, but I've, seen statistics that anywhere from a quarter to a third of residents don't have a car. That could be households, I'm not sure. But, again, that doesn't really even capture the full extent because, a lot of families are sharing a car and that car oftentimes is not super reliable.
I also look at transit as a hand up, not a handout, and creating more economic opportunities. When I think about my time, and this is a different view at it because I come from it from a different angle. When I think about my time working in corporate communications and working around workforce, one of the things that was a challenge in talent attraction and keeping people in Detroit and Metro Detroit was that additional cost of a car. It's something that not everyone's going to use, right? But as having it as an option creates so many more doors for you. Maybe one day your goal is to get a car, but you need to get that job first to get a car. And a lot of times people are locked in geographic poverty because they're unable to get out of their neighborhoods.
No doubt. Absolutely.
When we look at this transit issue, what's the root of it? Because it feels like it's, to the public anyway, kind of befuddling. Like we're just wrestling with this, and it seems to be getting worse, and maybe they plateau a little bit, and there's just this back and forth. What is the root issue happening here when it comes to transit in Detroit?
Well, the root issue, I would say, is really the lack of funding. We invest less per capita in transit than any other metro region of our size in the United States. With less money, it just means less transit service. For a long time, our drivers have been among the lowest paid in the nation. The agencies have made some progress on that, including DDOT here in Detroit. But still, the drivers right now are only starting at $19 an hour, which it really isn't the competitive wage that we need to have the drivers that we need and get more service on the road.
Well, especially considering you're competing against other commercial entities, right, where they can get paid some more. Now, obviously, it's clear, not just with recent changes over at the Department of Transportation, but for a while, it seems like the city is aware of these issues, and they have this DDOT Reimagined Plan. Can we talk a little bit about what that is?
The consultants who prepared it took a couple years gathering community input, a couple years of looking at data around what's changed in travel patterns since COVID-19, and put together this plan that would essentially double the amount of bus service in the city. You'd have major routes like Woodward and Gratiot running every 10 to 15 minutes, and you'd have every route in the city running at least every half an hour. That includes crosstown routes like the Claremont, for example, which currently only run every hour. That's the level of service that they already have out in Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti. Every route out there now runs at least every 30 minutes.
I apologize if I'm making this too simple, but I feel like there's a math issue between wanting to increase that service, but not having enough money to deliver the service you currently have. And I think, and maybe I'm kind of supposing here, that this is part of your idea of a transportation writer's idea of doubling DDOT and advocating for the case for investing into Detroit transit by doubling the budget. Those two things are tied, I assume.
Yeah, and TRU has joined with, at this point, over 25 other organizations in this coalition to pursue this double DDOT campaign. Those include environmental organizations, community organizations, a whole host of different groups. And what we're asking is for City Council and the mayor to get on course to fulfilling that DDOT Reimagined Plan by incrementally increasing the amount of money in the city budget for DDOT.
So in real terms, how has the budget been for DDOT over the last, say, 20 years or something? Has it been steady? Has inflation affected it? So
it was cut a great deal, not surprisingly, over the course of the Bing administration and the bankruptcy. Then it was somewhat stagnant, stable for a few years. Last year, the mayor did make a pretty significant increase to the budget, which has allowed those somewhat more competitive wages, still below where they need to be. Until last year, the wage was just $15 an hour to start for DDOT drivers. So what we really want to do is for the city to continue on that path of increasing the DDOT budget, increasing service by putting $150 million of the city's general fund dollars towards DDOT this coming fiscal year.
Finances are always tight for a city. What are some of your thoughts and the proposal's thoughts for finding different pots of money, right? As opposed to just, say, taking from one thing and adding to another. I know that there's been some excellent financial management as of late with the city in the recent administration, but doubling DDOT, that's not a small ask.
Not at all. It's a very big one. Yeah, just for context, DDOT is pretty unusual among transit systems of its size in that all the local money that funds it comes from the city of Detroit's general fund. There's no dedicated funding like there is with SMART, which has a property tax millage specifically for its services.
And in some places I have traveled, maybe it's on the city or maybe the county level, there's often, say, like a sales tax levied, and that's not legal in Michigan right now, currently, correct?
Correct.
So if we wonder why, like, we keep going towards property taxes or general fund, it's because many of the tools that other places use, Michigan doesn't allow us, correct?
Correct.
Okay. This would help address some of the holes in the service because you have a lot of people that even under the current system don't have the ability. Like I think according to some of the data I've seen here, only about 28% of Detroiters are within a 5-minute walk of frequent bus service. That's kind of amazing to me. Like not in a good way.
Sure. Yeah, if you don't live along those major corridors, just to get to those major corridors, you may have to wait a long time for a bus.
Now, if I remember correctly, that DDOT Reimagined Plan also brought some things that were like, I don't know if it was actual bus rapid transit, but something like it. I remember, and fill me in, because you're definitely much more of an expert than I remember seeing some things around like Jefferson Avenue and the service for that and stuff that looked really cool, but it felt like at the time when it was rolled out, I was like, well, how are we going to pay for this? Am I missing the boat here? Or am I kind of on the same track?
Well, that's a good question, because in the DDOT Reimagined Plan, it does describe some of these more frequent corridors as bus rapid transit. And bus rapid transit can be a variety of things. Ideally, it's having separate lanes for the buses so they can actually bypass traffic, car traffic, that is. It's still unclear exactly what we're looking at for this pilot program on Jefferson that you mentioned. This year, DDOT is supposed to be rolling out a kind of bus rapid transit or bus rapid transit light pilot program, probably not with dedicated lanes, so far as I know, but with better shelter facilities, maybe some pull-out areas for buses. We're actually talking with the new DDOT director later today. But at this point, I personally don't have a good sense of what that pilot will involve.
So you're advocating for more appropriation from the general fund, but what other ways would you like to see the city start to advocate for more money? What are other options might be on the table?
You mentioned the sales tax, which currently is off the table in Michigan, but could be on the table with some constitutional changes. It's a pretty heavy lift. The Regional Transit Authority has the option of putting a regional property tax before voters, like the one that was very narrowly voted down in 2016. It also has the ability to put a vehicle registration fee to fund transit before voters as well. And there's some other ideas, too, that have gone around. I think Council President Sheffield has been talking about possibly an entertainment tax. And that's something that could conceivably fund transit.
Well, I think about the highest traffic uses of transit, and, in my inbox was this really neat thing about Smart, the suburban bus system is doing, where they're doing Lion shuttles and things like that, where if you encourage just a few more people to not drive, you could really add a lot of efficiency to what happens, downtown with those games.
For sure.
Things like that. It's a way for people who don't always touch transit to be able to be like, oh, I see where it can really benefit me,
Absolutely. Yeah. And downtown is such a mess with major events. I mean, people don't want to pay that much for parking, don't want to have to navigate that downtown traffic. We're really pleased that SMART is taking this opportunity to provide that service and familiarize more people with transit.
Now, to be clear, if you were to raise some sort of millage that would be regional, the money wouldn't just all go to the city of Detroit. It would benefit across the region, right?
Absolutely.
Now, would that be the same case with recent news about the possibilities of Wayne County having a transit millage?
Unlike Oakland County, which just passed a county-wide transit millage in 2022, Wayne County still has a lot of communities that don't pay into the system and don't receive service as a result. Talking about Livonia, Plymouth, Canton, some areas in sort of the southern end of Downriver. And this past legislative session, the legislature passed a bill that would put transit on the ballot for the entire county when it next comes up for renewal in 2026. And that could really make a big difference in terms of getting bus service into communities that haven't had it in the past. Also really enhancing local service for residents when it comes to dial-a-ride services for seniors, folks with disabilities. That kind of service is really limited in Western Wayne County right now, and better funding would make a big difference.
Again, you've studied a lot of this stuff more than I have, but it is my experience when I travel to other mid-sized cities that the county ends up being like a very important vehicle for transit funding. Because I think about Indianapolis, I think about Columbus, like that county bucket. And it's a little more difficult because of the geography of Metro Detroit, where the center of things is kind of spread across 3 counties. But that county bucket ends up being like a very important governmental vehicle to get funding through.
For sure. And we're very glad for the leadership that Wayne County Executive Warren Evans has shown in pushing for this county-wide proposal.
So the goal is to increase the DDOT funding to double DDOT. What are some of the next steps? What are you looking for people to do? Especially, I would say, city residents, right? Because City residents are going to have the biggest voice in this conversation, right? If you live outside of the city or you own a business in the city, that's one thing. But it's the residents who vote. And I know from talking to a number of council members over the years, like they want to hear from their residents, right?
We're encouraging folks to go to DetroitTransit.org. We have a tool on our website where you can email your council members and the mayor. We're also encouraging folks to make calls to their council people. Just Google Detroit City Council and find out who your council person is if you don't already know, and give their office a call. Appreciate input, and it really does make a difference, especially since we're in an election year.
For sure. When I hear about any focused issue, when people are really passionate about something, they wonder, well, why doesn't the legislator do something or something like that? What you have to do is you got to get that action going. Those legislators need to hear your complaint, not just on the internet, not just like on X or Threads or Facebook. Send that note, send that email, send that letter, make that call. Those letters and calls are part of what people really take into account, you know?
That's very well said. And I think, our council members at this point, are aware that transit is important. But what I think is different with this campaign is that we have a very specific goal that we're asking them to fulfill, that short-term allocation of $150 million for transit, and that this long-term goal of implementing the DDOT Reimagined Plan.
And upcoming is an event for Transportation Writers United where you're going to be sharing updates, not just about this, but about transportation.
Yeah. So we have our Transportation Writers United's annual State of Transit event is coming up on January 28th. We'll have a panel of transit leaders, have an opportunity to talk with fellow transit advocates, and that's January 28th here at Techtown.
For sure. And I'll make sure to have a link to that in the show notes. And I think also that's something that we'll be covering and maybe talking to some folks afterward, just kind of see what the temperature of things is. Because with that event, you're always bringing in people who are very involved in things, correct? Like officials and such, right?
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, we'll have the new director of DDOT, representatives from SMART, Ann Arbor Transit Authority, and the Regional Transit Authority, too.
All right. Well, Joel Batterman, the campaigns manager for Transportation Writers United, thank you so much for spending some time with us on Daily Detroit. I really appreciate you. And if people want to learn more, where can they go?
You can go to DetroitTransit.org.
And that is it for today's episode. As always, feedback, dailydetroit@gmail.com. Thank you to our members, patreon.com/dailydetroit. Local media requires local support to survive. So join us, patreon.com/dailydetroit. With that, I'm Jer Stays. Thank you so much for listening. Remember that you are somebody, and we'll talk tomorrow.